obviously, that's my background, not only in Chicago but here in Las Vegas. And you know, it's not as easy. Some people think, oh, what a uh, great job, a professional sports bettor. But it takes a lot of work. You got to surround yourself by a lot of good people. You got to put the time into it. And if you do all that, and you surround yourself by good people, and you know what you're doing, you make money at it.
And that's one of the things, Chuck, is a lot of people don't realize that. Is I've met, and it seems to more Vegas guys, because me being in Detroit, the guys that I'm connected to for the most part are I'm talking on Skype or the phones. I mean, you guys are going out to eat, you're meeting, at bars, you're at the sports books talking. And one of the things I guess surprised me the most in my travels to Vegas is for the people that to me are that upper 1% that could actually bet sports for a living. You would assume, like in many other things, there, not saying there's not ego, because there's a lot of that. And I've met a lot of the guys, and there's a lot of ego, but it's not enough ego where they don't want to learn more. And they're not trying to, like you said, surround themselves with the best people. Like my friend Chris and Frank, they do a lot of stuff. And I love Frank, but we had him on the ESPN radio. And if you would have heard some of his stuff on the NFL, he didn't sound like a real expert. But these guys are betting, thousands and thousands a game because they will take information from guys that are really good in the NFL. They'll trade it with guys that are getting, hockey totals or whatever it is. And what it ends up being is almost like a network of people that get the endorsement of their peers and are trading information, fine tuning information, and essentially almost playing where, your selections are your selections, but outside of your own handicapping, if there's a guy that you respect or certain information or sources you have, you could use that to filter your stuff down. And, I'm guessing, and you correct me if I'm wrong, that's one of the things that makes someone like you so successful is that network that allows you to, I guess, fine tune your final product. Am I correct in that assumption?
You said it great, Johnny. Very, very well said. Because this is business, and if you and me are out here, and you're a college basketball guy, and you're a math guy, and you do totals of college basketball, and that I'm getting good information, and I'm putting the work in, and I'm getting good stuff on the sides. You're going to want my sides. I'm going to want your totals, and and it networks from there. If I'm on a side, and it's somebody who I respect is on the other side, and it's somebody I respect, I won't play it. I mean, I have a strong opinion. I'm a strong-headed guy, but I know in the long run, unless there's really some information that I feel like, is above and beyond, and I'm not going to make a move. There's too many other good games out there that I could move on to. But that what you said is right on, and the better people you surround yourself by, and obviously these people want. If I'm doing my job, obviously there's people who are going to want to know what I'm looking at. And as you know, I mean, there's even a good. We've got a great group of guys at pregame.com right there. Some great minds to run things by and get their synopsis on things, and all that definitely helps you make some money.
So before we get to the talking some college basketball and taking some questions from the audience and ones that have been submitted to me via email, is I think it deserves a little bragging. Tell me a little about your history in the Leroy's contest and in the Cantor contest. And after you kind of give me some highlights, and this interests me is like, how do you prepare for the contest, and what different goes into coming up with the selections and preparing, for when you finally decide to submit? So I guess the first thing is give me a little background on your participation in the Las Vegas contest. And from there, let me know what you would say is for the people listening and the ones who are going to watch this and listen to this down the road, since this is going to be some evergreen content, a couple tips you could give to people if they do enter a handicapping contest of what they should be doing different.
All right, well, let's start off with the one that I was just in there. A $5,000 entry fee, $90,000 for the $90,000 in the pot, plus Cantor Gaming, who does a great job out here, threw another 10,000 in there. And what makes that contest a little different, Johnny, than some of the other contests is you have to play whatever the number is that day. So we would do it about 2 o'clock Pacific time here in Las Vegas on a Friday afternoon. Where we might have liked the game +7, now it's down to 4.5, and we're not going to play that side. So there is a little different going into those contests. You're going to play with widely available numbers, and I had a partner in it as well. So it was one of those things where there were 7 games. You had to pick your top 7 games. I picked my top 3. He picked his top 3, and then we had one that we agreed on. Week 1, we went 5-1-1 against the number in the contest and moved on to the next round. That's still the best round in that contest that anybody's had. 5-1-1 against the number. The next round we actually went 4-3, but our good friend Steve Fezzik went 5-2. So your record from the first round doesn't carry over. So we lost that by the one game there. So, but it's fun to do. I'll be honest with you, the contests are kind of fun to do, and Cantor threw in an extra 10,000, which made it a little more interesting as far as some plus even action, and we went at it like that. But so that's just one of the contests. There's plenty of, obviously the Las Vegas Hilton NFL contest. I'm more of a college guy, even though I like the NFL. I'm still waiting for some of these hotels to throw out some good college football contests. Right now, they don't have any big money ones.
So real quick, so you lost to Steve. So the following week, did you look to see who you would have taken and how you would have done, or you didn't want to put yourself through that misery?
It's funny. I really didn't do that, but what I did do is we had our choice. We were the number 1 seed, so we had our choice what week we wanted to go next, and we went the second week after we won because we were the last ones in the first round, and I would have done well, very well that next week, but I didn't want to go back to back. So, and nothing wrong. We went 4-3. We easily could have went 5-2, but Fez had a good record that week. He went 5-2 and moved on.
Well, one of the things I want to talk about is like you said, is your college stuff, especially college basketball. So before we get to the Q&A of some of the questions that we have, I'm going to minimize this screen. And I know you're a line shopping guy, and you're going to say, I could get that at a better number, but for sake of the webinar, I'm going to do something that's easy for me to look at and read. Let's get right to the nitty gritty. Right now, Indiana is the odds-on favorite to win it all, followed by Duke, Michigan, Louisville, and then you got a second tier with Arizona, Syracuse, Florida, and then it goes on from there. If I had to say, all right, Chuck, here's $10,000 in cash, I'm going to split with you the win. So I want your best pick, not value or, the odds are good. I know how your guys' minds think. Well, maybe I'd like Indiana, but, getting the 12-1 is a better.
You're giving me everybody at the same odds. I'm going to take Indiana.
Okay. So Indiana is your pick to favor. Like if there was no odds and I had to put you in like a bracket type contest.
Right now, Johnny, I would have Indiana on a neutral court, 2-point favorite over the next team. So that I have them rated my number 1 team right now, and there's a long way to go. But right now, I have them 2 points better than anybody else. Believe it or not, Florida is right behind them. And actually, I said 2.5. Florida's probably about a point different. So Florida would be my second choice, but Indiana would be my first choice. And Florida right now, a little bit of a dark horse. If you are a guy who's looking for value, I think I would play Florida right now before Indiana just because of the value. But Indiana would be my first choice.
In Florida, they put an ass whooping on Florida State today.
Yeah, they do. Not only do they, they're my kind of team. Not only are they very good offensively, but very good defensively. And when you get in the tournament, if you could play defense like Florida can, they're going to go far.
All right, so we have Indiana as the pick if you're doing brackets. Who do you predict in the Final Four? Like obviously I know.
I understand. Yeah, we don't know how they're going to be broken up. But I guess I'll be a little chalky here. But I mean, Indiana, Florida would be my number 1 and 2, and I tell you, I think this Duke team's pretty good. I think by the end of the year, Duke would have to be one of those teams that you would put in there. And then let me throw let me throw a dark horse in there since I had three little chalks there. But how about I'm going to go with the Beeline over there in Michigan. It's not that much of a dark horse. I'll throw Michigan in the mix.
I was actually at the game yesterday against
That's your
Western, and
okay.
it was just amazing that like they had an off night on the shooting for a while, but like you go take a piss, you come back, and they're up 20 for being a young squad. I mean, they could shoot and they could
I
play.
think, yeah. You know what? I mean, I like your coach over there, and I think right now you're not seeing their best basketball right now. This is a team who's going to be playing by tournament time. They're going to be a couple points higher in the power number.
So if I had to say right now, um, based off how maybe they're getting a couple wins by luck or maybe a perception, if I had to say, give me a couple teams that are getting the love of being the powerhouses, but you look at as like, no, not really kind of teams. Almost like how a lot of the pros in Vegas looked at the Atlanta Falcons. Like even though they were
Yeah,
winning
exactly.
and they had all these odds, every week I heard from the guys in Vegas, their thing was, Atlanta's not a team that's going to be there at the end.
Well,
So
they're an overvalued team as they're undefeated, and the record of the opponents they played were about 38%. So that's definitely something we look at. I know what you're asking me, and the first team that would jump out at me would be Kansas. I think everybody knows Kansas is one of those big names and stuff, but I think they will have a down season this year.
who would you say is underrated? Who's a team? So you mentioned Florida. Is there any other team that you could look at? And I know when I did my webinars actually before this season, I remember if it was Dave Essler, his dark horse in the beginning of the year when the odds were actually pretty high. I think I looked at the sports book; they're actually 12-1 now. Is he liked Arizona? So if I had to say, give me two value bets. So I can't bet Indiana. My sports book won't let me bet it. They're overloaded on Indiana action.
Gonzaga's probably not. I mean, Gonzaga's a real good team, but that I think could make some noise this year. I don't know if that's really value, but a little dark horse out the Minnesota Gophers out of your Big Ten country there. I think Minnesota could be a dark horse this year. Um, they're playing great. They're playing good ball. I think that's a team who could be a good dark horse.
See, to me, that's some of the things I like to do. Is sometimes I will take those teams and just throw something on them, and if they get deep enough in the tournament, depending how they're looking, I mean, you could almost lock in a profit. And I'm sure at some places like a Five Dimes, a Bet Online, you could get better odds. But I'm just looking here at a sports book, and Minnesota right now is 40-1. So,
I had Missouri last year, John, 100-1. And
really.
they were 100-1, but there's no way I could make money off it to win the tournament because if you remember losing that first round game, but I thought I was sitting on a pretty good ticket.
So, real quick, and a lot of times when they do these webinars is, a lot of it's off the cuff, stuff comes up and, answers turn into more questions. So we see a lot of this in the forum, and you being a professional bettor, this is something I'm sure a lot of people would like to hear. So let's say you had Missouri, and like I always been under the rule, and I've heard people tell me this, but everyone has their own opinion, is you should never hedge unless the money is something that is worth it, I guess. So like if you're taking something that you think has value, when it's finally going to win, for you to turn around and give up all that value and take a small profit doesn't make sense. If it's something where it's a 40-1, 100-1, or you get nothing, yeah, you could hedge and you could do whatever. So I guess my question to you, what is an opportunity that will make you consider hedging versus not considering hedging? Like what kind of value do you have to consider chopping up a bet that you felt had value and you don't want to give all that value away and give the casino back a chunk of their money and just be a puss?
Right, but if you got something, I'll give you an example, and it didn't work out, but um, for example, I mean, I was gonna, I mean, make some big money. Let me go back two ways. I mean, last year with Missouri, I would have hedged because I was gonna. I mean, literally, I was gonna make $100,000 because I put 1,000 on him at 100-1. So I wouldn't have been stupid. There's no question I would have hedged. Especially in that situation because they were going to be a favorite in a lot of games. I had a situation, Johnny, 2 years ago, or it might have been 3 years ago. I had Baylor at 200-1, and I don't make a lot of future bets, but I usually do in college basketball. If I see something happening, but I had Baylor at 200-1. The problem there was they were a big dog in all their games, and the only way you could hedge is by taking the other team on the money line. And you're going to have to lay, you'd have to lay a big price. They ended up losing to Duke that year. Duke was a 10-point favorite in the game, and if they would have won that game, they would have moved on to the Elite Eight, I believe. So it's sometimes it's not as easy to hedge on your future bets. It's not like maybe an NFL playoff game or a baseball playoff game. With the tournament, it's a little tougher sometimes.
So,
Unless you get a team who's going to be a favorite. If I had
right.
Missouri and they were a 10-point favorite, obviously you get great value with an underdog if they're in the Sweet 16 or you could even take a shot and take the team plus the points and win both sides.
So before we get to the Q&A, Chuck, is if you had to give a couple tips for betting, we'll say college basketball, because that's the sport we're in right now. What are some things for a recreational guy? And I've had some webinars and I've said that, it's unless you're doing it professionally, even guys that are doing professionally, it's difficult to do. To think you could do the whole card and have a normal 9 to 5 isn't going to happen. So I always tell people, pick a conference, follow all the beat writers and everything you can on Twitter, find all the fan sites, bookmark all the local newspapers, and just become an expert. Unless you're doing power ratings, which then it could allow you to kind of open more of the Pandora's box and do more teams. So what advice would you give a recreational guy, a couple tips to maybe up their game on what they should be looking for when they're handicapping college basketball this season?
I think what you mentioned, here's the thing. If you're a recreational guy and you just, you want to, be able to play the games on TV and, and doesn't matter what conference, then what I would say, and there's plenty of them available now, use power numbers, at least for your foundation, because that will keep you off some of the real square sides. If you have Syracuse is playing Georgetown and Syracuse has been playing great and they're a 4-point favorite and, the whole world, all the public likes Syracuse. But if you look at a power number and you see, well, Syracuse is only supposed to be 3 and they're 4, hopefully you're smart enough to know that those combinations, you're on the wrong side maybe if you're going to take Syracuse. But there's plenty of people on the internet. If you don't, obviously you're not going to make your own numbers if you're just a recreational guy. But that's something that you could do just to kind of keep you off some bad sides. The other thing, like you mentioned, if you really want to do it serious, of course you're not going to, like you said, you're not going to have time to look at all these conferences. Pick one conference, read the school newspapers, read the local newspapers, get a good feel for who they're playing next. Read, maybe, listen to some of the coaches' press conferences. Get really a good feel for that conference, and then you could have a successful year.
Well, let's get to the fun part. Everyone who's with us live, we got about 25 minutes left. We're going to get to the Q&A. There's about 5 questions preloaded. We're probably not going to get to too many after that. So if you're listening right now, you want to submit, you can do that using the pop-up module. If you want to ask Chuck a question, and it doesn't even have to be on college basketball. You want to ask something about the Bulls, maybe something more about the contest, whatever it is, I'd get it in. So what we're going to do is we're going to get right to the questions. And Chuck, this is your webinar. If you feel you want to elaborate a little bit more than normal on a certain question, feel free. But usually the best thing is give a couple high points and we'll move on to the next one. But, don't, like I said, this is all about you. So if it's a topic or something you have a lot of information on and you feel it's worth going that little extra mile to talk, feel free, and I'll sit back and wait till you're ready to go to the next one. So the first question is, I spend a lot of time handicapping college hoops. In fact, it's the one sport I excel in, probably because I'm not a true fan and I could take emotion out of my equations. I have no problem finding teams on the rise. What puzzles me is how to gauge when a hot team is primed for a collapse or letdown. For example, I've been really high on both Boise State and Wyoming. They're both on a great run in beating teams they would normally lose to. But I know there will be a situation that blindsides them or causes a major letdown. What kind of situations would you look for that might suggest this happening and prevent me from playing on them at the wrong time?
Oh yeah, I mean, I'll just use Boise here as a quick example. Obviously, they've been playing great ball, upsetting Creighton, and some big wins as an underdog. And tonight's a good example that I could use. I don't know the exact scores, but I saw the early score. So now Boise's been playing great. Now all of a sudden they go to a Utah team. Now they're the favorite. They're not being hunted. They're not the hunter. They're being hunted here. Also Utah tonight. You know, honoring Rick Majerus and all. So um, probably a bad spot for Boise. If you look at them, they're now all of a sudden they've been a dog. Now all of a sudden they're the favorite. They're on the road at Utah team who has a little more emotion to play for. So that's one thing. Or sometimes you look for you know, those teams. Like Wyoming the other night, they were a dog against Illinois State. A great job last night in the second half. But maybe after that big win, if now all of a sudden if I'm not even sure they're playing next, but you look for if all of a sudden they're a big favorite or they're expected to win, maybe not against a good team, that sometimes could be a flat spot, especially if they have another game on deck that might be a bigger game for them.
Yeah, Utah's actually up 16 at the half. So I,
Yeah.
I guess that's a perfect example of, like you said, of being in a bad spot. Um, so the next question is, how much do you add or deduct into the line when one of the teams is a very public team? Public perception obviously skews the line with top tier teams like Duke, North Carolina, and even second tier teams like Gonzaga, UCLA, or UNLV. Thanks, Scotty Dog.
So how much when I make my number? You mean how much do I
Yeah,
add
you,
if they're a
you
public team?
factor in, like for example, back in the day when I used to call a local, and back when I was a young buck, back before the internet stuff, is I knew no matter what the paper line was, the Gult's Cover or whatever the hell line used to be.
Right.
If I called for Michigan or whatever, my book was always gonna juice it, and back then I still would take them. So I guess, do you feel that the books are adding extra points onto the Dukes in North Carolina, or do you think that's
Oh,
a public myth?
no, there's definitely probably you could definitely take advantage. I see what you're saying. I thought you were asking if I enter in my numbers. I mean, I'll have my numbers, and there's definitely that public perception. I mean, we've seen it already this year. Um, with North Carolina, that Indiana game against North Carolina was a great example. There was a lot of sharp money in Indiana against North Carolina because it was North Carolina. I mean, it was still a double digit. It was like a 10-point favorite. I think got bet up to 11, but because of that public perception, North Carolina, and a lot of people were taking North Carolina that day, but there was no question Indiana was the right side. So because they were, if that same exact team was called, San Diego State, that line might have been 15, so
Right.
even if it's the exact same player. So there's no question. And, I don't care what sport we're talking about, there's still situations that you could take advantage of that public perception. Sometimes it's built into the line, sometimes not, but there is definitely situations where you could do that with.
Is there any situations this season where, when you were doing your numbers or breaking down the games, that outside of like your your basic model, that you looked and you felt like maybe there was some added, besides the Indiana example, like are there certain teams that I guess you feel will have that added line value because of who they are and the books, the North Carolinas and the Dukes, or is there any teams that
Yeah,
anyone
well,
should
it's
look out
a
for?
great example, Johnny, is Kentucky because let's face it, it was Kentucky, but nobody saw these kids play together. This team wasn't. These guys, these are all freshmen. Maybe I think there's one sophomore, a guy transferred from NC State, the point guard. But these guys aren't. So, but because they're Kentucky and because of what they've been doing, over the years with the freshmen, the line was what it was. But that first game when they played Maryland, I believe it was, that line was way too high. I mean, these guys haven't even really played together. I don't know if you remember last year, Kentucky, as good as that team was, don't quote me, but I want to say they were 0-10 against the number the first 10 games of the year last year.
Really?
And if you go back and look, that team was like 0-10 to start the year, and then and this team isn't as good as that team even but they will get things rolling. And for that, that just to elaborate a little bit, part of analyzing college basketball is to know when that team is going to start clicking. So right now, it's really good. It's been good to go against Kentucky, but there's going to be a time down the road here that's going to be good to go with Kentucky as soon as you get to see the team gel. And it's a young team. It's going to take them a while, but then you're going to have some value for a few games because they'll catch on to Kentucky a lot quicker than they would on a Wichita State, for example. But again, there will be a time this year that Kentucky will be undervalued, believe it or not. But right now, obviously, that's a good example of a team that was overvalued to start the season.
And what you said is exactly goes back to the point at the beginning of the webinar of following stuff on Twitter, like you said, the school papers and whatnot, is the math and the power ratings could only take you so far because they're based off statistics. But like you said, is if you're X amount of game into the season, the model might say the line should be one thing, but if you are following the beat writer for whatever newspaper follows Kentucky, and you're seeing on Twitter like how well the practices are going, or you're watching the game and you've been watching so much Kentucky passes that were overthrown or guys out of position early in the year are now they're getting those passes and they're in position, and they're running the plays. And is that an example of the time, like you said, is they're not covering people on in the beginning, then the line's going to be adjusting, and then it's all of a sudden you're going to reverse your role. And instead of fading Kentucky, you could say, okay, I'm getting the good number now because Kentucky's been dog shit against the number. Everyone thinks they're bums. But like you said, they're young kids, but they have a shitload of talent. They're not making the same sloppy play anymore. They're gelling in practice. This number this week is when I'm going to take Kentucky. Is that an example of things that you can't just use the math, that you actually have to follow the teams to be able to pick those spots?
It's a great example, absolutely, because the power number. Just remember the power number is your foundation. That's kind of the foundation, but you can't just go off the number. And I'll just when I talk about doing your work, let's say you're reading, Kentucky's playing bad. Also, you're reading the Kentucky paper. All of a sudden, you're reading Calipari some quotes, and hypothetically, let's say he says, you know what, it took us a while. My team finally gets it. They know.
Right.
They finally understand the system. This is the best game they played. They really are getting it. They really are starting to figure it all out. Just little something like that is going to pique your interest to kind of take a look at that team. And that's going to be a higher profile team. Obviously, if you get it with a young team like Virginia Commonwealth or something, even though they're not that young of a team this year. But I'm just saying you might even have more value when something like that happens. But there's still going to be value with Kentucky sometime during the season.
And to be honest, I think that's one of the reasons, when I used to do a lot of middling or, I'd get these plays, it would be these schools you never heard of because, with all of these games, Vegas for the most part and, the offshores, they're having to use power ratings because there's no way that they have that many people on staff to have an accurate line to do like what you're saying is saying, okay, Kentucky's starting to gel. We got to factor that in. They're having to use power ratings because they got to have lines up in 24 hours for, 80, 90 games for, South Wichita State Central. So if you're a person that knows South Wichita State Central, I mean, sometimes you could actually go under the radar for a while and play on and off those teams because you know what's going on and almost take advantage of the number itself because you know that it's just a power rating. And to me, it kind of is almost like with poker is, by no means I'm a poker pro, but I used to play a lot. And I was good for a while until it got to the point that all the donkeys stopped playing and I was stuck playing with better players and I wasn't as good as them. So then I saw the writing on the wall and said, okay, it's going to be strictly recreational. But when poker was big and everybody played, one of my things is I would know the guys at the table that I know just read a book and I knew that they were doing certain things based off the book and I could do moves to manipulate them because they're playing solely off the math. And I knew I could do plays and take advantage of that. Where on some of these college basketball games, like you said, is if so-and-so is not covering, the book eventually has to adjust the number to reflect that. Well, eventually, like you said, they start gelling in practice. The coach says, hey, we've been running this offense for a quarter of the year. These kids finally get it. The guy making the line might never hear that. You hear it. So then you're like, okay, this team is now time to strike and take them. Am I correct in what I just said?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're also very, a team like Kentucky, you might only be able to get them for maybe a couple games until the line catches up. But if you do have, a team like, Middle Tennessee State, you might be able to get, you might be able to catch them before it's going to take a longer, I believe, for that line to kind of catch up. The line makers are very slow to adjust those power numbers, especially when they've got 10 games into the season.
Right.
They're not going to over adjust the number. So yeah, you might be able to ride a Middle Tennessee State for 3 or 4 games. And I'll just give you another quick example when talking about the power numbers and adjusting numbers. It's it's I'm not giving out any great secrets, but it's something that's worked that hopefully the line makers won't ever catch on to. But second semester, there's a lot of good players that aren't eligible first semester, and now they come back second. They're eligible second semester, and there's certain guys who dramatically improve the team when they come back. But the
Right.
line makers are still making the line like this guy never came back, and those are things you could look for. Here second semester when these guys are eligible. But that's another thing that they're slow to move the line in because the power number is what it is. Now, when a guy is injured or when a guy is not there, they're quicker to adjust the number when a guy is injured. But when a guy comes back, they're slower to adjust the number
And
for
my
whatever
guess
reason.
is maybe not for like a Duke if a
Right.
stud player, but like the South Wichita State Central, you know, the stud player or the point guard that was ineligible when they come back. I mean, I've met a lot of these guys. I mean, they're sharp, but nobody could really know everything about every team. And I remember I was talking to Chris Andrews and he was doing his breakdown, trying to prep for the college basketball season. I flat out asked him, I said, in the beginning of the season, you know, with a lot of like new kids coming in or spring practice or whatever it is, I go, how can you? Is it possible for these no-name schools to have accurate numbers? And he's like, it's really not. They have to use basic, like you said, like the power numbers, and the people that know more about these recruits and how like the gelling and like you said is in the second half of the season. It's almost the same scenario where some no-name schools getting back their stud point guard. Nobody really cares because they're 7-8 or whatever. They're a no-name school, so the books are focusing on the Dukes, the North Carolinas, and you can go in and say, this team number is not going to be right. The books are going to eventually catch on, but in the end, to me, it's all a matter of pluses and minuses. And if you could cherry pick some of those games and get those bad lines and take advantage of them, to me, it just adds units to your arsenal.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're going to get some situations. You're not going to be able to play it all year, but you're going to you sometimes. I'll give you a good example of what we were just talking about. Pepperdine. It was 3 or 4 years ago. They had this kid who came in second semester, this big guy who dramatically improved the team, and it probably took him 4 or 5 games before the line I felt was properly adjusted. And so those you got to pick and choose your spots, but those are definitely out there. And you mentioned the line maker. Sometimes they'll just make the line, and they know that the money is kind of going to adjust the number. I mean, as long as, like you said, it's not a Duke, North Carolina, where they're taking a lot of public action on it.
So, next question is it's off base from the college basketball, but I mean it's stuff that I say this to RJ and Marco and everybody VR all the time is almost everyone across the board are transplants. You're from the Midwest or East Coast or whatever. Is I don't think you guys realize like how cool it is that you live in Vegas. You're better for living. You're at the sports books. You're mingling with professional bettors. Just the whole Vegas experience and what you guys do for the rest of the country literally could be a reality show and follow you guys around. So the question is, take us through an average day of what it is to be you, I guess. You bet for a living. I mean, I guess walk us through a normal day. Let's do two. Let's do during the week on a college basketball day, and let's do an NFL weekend. probably can't go to the club all the time and get hammered until 7 in the morning and then turn around and try doing your action. So I'm going to sit back and take as long as you want. Walk us through the life of being you in Las Vegas.
Yeah, well, the NFL weekend, I always call them. People want to go out. I go, sorry, it's a school night for me. I'm not going out because obviously you got to be up. I'm up on the. We'll do the football first. I mean, I'm up in front of the computer, in front of the screen, and at 6 in the morning, uh, I spend a lot of time looking at the screen. When I say the screen for the people out there, I mean the screen that has all the odds from all the casinos on it, and I pay a lot of attention to that. Um, I do most of the, college basketball. I do my work the night before. I mean, I'll be for all the games going on here tomorrow. Um, I'll be doing my work, start doing my work here right after the webinar here, and then I'll have a very good idea of what I'm looking for, what numbers I'm looking for, and maybe still trying to maybe find out a couple key injuries and stuff like that. But but I'll do my work into the night, and then basically uh, you can't just sit at the screen all day. But obviously you're trying to get the best numbers and of games you're looking at, seeing how the lines are moving. That's always something that I'm doing and making calls and talking to different people. But and out here in Vegas, obviously we also have the advantage to go into casinos and picking off good numbers. We have a lot of different places, even though our outs are getting as the corporations take over, our outs are getting smaller numbered every day, but there's still a lot of different outs out here where you could go and cherry pick some numbers, even if you might see a number somewhere, a sharp place offshore might have it -4, and you're looking to take the dog, and you might place locally here might have it at 5. Well, you're going to obviously want to, if you don't have an account there, you're going to want to go there and take advantage of that 5.
All right, next question, and it was kind of interesting that this was one of the questions because I was going to ask you this one whether it came in or not. Is you being a college basketball guy and, like you said, the momentum of the game and physically understanding by watching what's going on, and it's not just math. What's some advice? And right now, I don't know if you can see my screen, and I'm pulling up my sports options. What's some advice for people who like to bet half times? For me, I'm a guy that in the end I want 2 + 2 to equal 4, and I'll run database. And a lot of people follow me on Twitter. I'm always quoting like this team and that team. It's because I'm a numbers nerd. Like I'll hear people, I'll read a book and they'll quote numbers or how common a number is, and I'll sit and I'll run 20-year scenarios to see if that's accurate or if my assumptions are true. So what I'm about to say is there's no hard science behind it. Is in college basketball, to me, is when you watch the games, and I've talked to some guys offshore to ask about the half times, and they said for the most part it's because it has to be up quick, has to factor in the game line, they have to factor in their exposure. Is sometimes it's just straight math. So sometimes when I'm watching a game, you might see that the final couple of minutes, like maybe the scrubs are in, or a couple overthrown passes, or the redheaded white guy in the bench comes in who never plays, and he just magically hit like 4 straight threes. So that halftime score is a little fluky, and then because of that, you're going to get some value in the halftime. I've never ran data to prove that that's the case or not, and by no means am I a halftime expert. So I don't anyone who's listening to this turn around and start draining the bank account and trying to watch obscure college basketball and then use that to take advantage of the math. So I guess, Chuck, from me to you, and if you don't bet them, don't make shit up. I know you're a professional bettor, and there's going to be questions that are going to come through that maybe aren't your forte, and I'd rather if you be honest. College basketball, there's a ton of games going on today. Do you bet half times? And if so, what are some things you look for?
Okay, I'll say real quick, and it's I know if it's not me, I know guys who do this, and I'll just say some of the things that I do or they do. And I'm not as big on half times, but I do have some guys who I get stuff from who do half times, and I know there's certain coaches. You want to chart. If you have time or get a database, and you could chart how teams play in the second half. There's some teams who are well coached, who make adjustments even in college basketball, they play better in the second half than the first
Exactly.
half. Obviously, you want to look at foul situation. If you got a key member in foul situation, that's one of the obvious ones. If you have a team who's up pretty good and they got a big game, maybe not tomorrow, but the next day, you might think there's certain coaches. You got to know who the coach is. They might rest players in the second half, knowing they got a big game coming up in less than 48 hours. So there's a lot there's a lot that go into it, but those are a couple of things that just jump out at me.
And then the coaching one, to be honest, I mean, it's a great point. I'm glad you brought that up. Is I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I had someone one time they did that in college football, and what the hell was the guy's name at USC?
Kiffin.
Uh, Before
Kiffin.
was it Carroll?
Yeah. Pete
Yeah,
Carroll. Uh huh.
yeah. Is he was a great coach in the second half, and I'll never forget. I was actually in Las Vegas, and I made a substantial wager on USC. Them and Michigan were kind of close at the half, and I was like, USC in the second half. That's just what they do. They got the talent to make the adjustments, and they're gonna whoop Michigan's ass. And there was no math or science. It's just was tracking, and I knew in certain situations with their talent that if he was going to make the changes to offset that other opposing coach who prepped to play USC, but you can only prep for a team for the first half. That's your game plan. And then it becomes coaching because the other team's going to turn around and counterpunch and say, okay, well, they watched our films. They know they did this. They figure out how to stop this. Well, I'm going to Jedi mind trick him and we're going to make these adjustments. And if that other team, either one doesn't have the talent or the coaching to make those quick adjustments back, that's when you see those better teams and coaches take advantage in the second half. So what you said on the coaching to me is dead on.
Yeah,
So
and you used a good example. That not only the coaching, like in that situation, Johnny, but certain teams wear other teams down. They got more gas left in the gas tank. They got a lot of depth and everything else. Another good example this year on the flip side was Oregon. They played unbelievable in the first half. The second half, they really kind of took it easy. And there's people who just started betting Oregon first half, and they wouldn't cover the second half, but they'd cover the first half.
Texas A&M last year, I mean, how many times was Texas A&M looking like world beaters? And
Yeah.
they shit the bed in the second half. I mean, that was a
You're
team
putting
like
some salt. You're put some salt in my wounds there. I was on A&M unfortunately for the game on a few of those, but yeah,
I
they
was
blew.
too, and that's how I know it got to the point that I told myself I'm just going to start, betting them first half and against them the
Yeah,
second half because they shit the
you
bed a
you
lot.
you were
So
you were
we got a
smart
couple.
on that. Yeah, they blew a lot of games.
Yeah, trust me, that's why the A&M one came up for me because I was on a lot of A&M games
I'm
too.
with you.
So what we're going to do is the first thing is we got a couple minutes left. I'm going to give a coupon to everyone who watches. By tomorrow morning, this video will be uploaded at the pregame website. It will be static on Chuck's homepage once the week's videos are down. So I'm going to put this in the forum for everyone to see tomorrow. I don't want this to jump ahead of any of the videos they did at the studio. So once those drop down for the week on Monday, I'll put it technically in the pregame.tv system. For anyone who is watching this now and anyone who is going to watch this in the next couple days, for the next 72 hours from Wednesday on, coupon code Chuck10 will take $10 off any one purchase you make at the pregame.com website. So before we go, what I want to do is I'm going to hand it over to Chuck, and I want you to let them know. I mean, you're going to be someone who's going to be selling it pregame. One of the things me and RJ did is, we sat down and we said, you know what, as we grow the Pregame Pros family, we really want to make it a point to find the guys in Vegas that are the ones betting full time because they can come in the studios, they can make videos, they could, do the radio spots. And anybody who doubts your resume, I mean, you're not some glossy photo on on some website or some guy that says you're a professional bettor. No one's ever heard of you. I mean, you're putting up 5 dimes, your own money to be in a contest. I mean, anyone could fly to Vegas and ask around, and you're the real deal. So I guess what would you say to all the people that are going to be watching this is if you had to give a couple of lines of why they should feel comfortable taking their money and investing it in your advice?
Well, I mean, I I do the work. I know what I know what I'm doing. I mean, I'm not a rookie at it, I guess, and I've been successful for a long time. And you know, anybody could be successful for a week, a month, 6 months, a year. But I've been doing this for a long time and been making a good living at it.
And to be honest, that to me that's the best resume possible. I mean, like I going back to when the poker was big, I used to run a couple underground card games. I played it a bunch, 40, 80, no, not no limit, round by rounds. And a lot of people I knew, they did good at the local games, they did at my games, and they had these dreams of being a pro poker player. So they took their bankroll, they went out to Vegas, and most of them are broke now. And there's a couple that are doing it full time. And to me, like you said, is anyone could win short term, anyone could hit certain streaks, but to do it professionally, make it your livelihood, and do it for multiple years, that is the upper 1%. So, Chuck, I want to say thanks very much for participating. What we're going to do is any future ones that we're going to be doing, they'll be more topic oriented, probably a lot more questions. But, as always, the first webinar we always do, it is always a kind of more of getting to know the handicapper and getting some basics of their philosophy. So, Chuck, I want to say once again, on behalf of everyone who watches this live right now, everyone who's going to be checking this out tomorrow, I appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule. I know you do a lot of media, the pregame videos at the studio. And like you said, as soon as we're done, you're going to be prepping for tomorrow's games. So I want to appreciate your time, and thanks for coming on. And is there anything you want to say to anyone before we close up?
No, so people have questions. I mean, I love to, do it again with you, Johnny, and answer any questions anybody would have. I enjoy talking sports. That's what I do.
All right. Well, that's it. I appreciate everyone for tuning in. I'm Johnny Detroit, People's Champ, on behalf of Pregame.com. I want to thanks Chuck Edel for coming on. And look for a lot of future stuff coming out of Pregame and a lot of the Vegas pros that we're going to be doing a lot of business with. Some exciting stuff. And you could always check Chuck out. He's over at pregame.tv. So from Johnny Detroit, pregame.com, thanks for watching. That's going to do it. We're back next week.